Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Tech Tuesday, where we will be showcasing gaming student projects. My name is Phoebe Elefante. I am the program director for the Interactive Technology and Game Design degrees here at Full Sail. And with me is my colleague and CES travel buddy, Shawn Kendall. Shawn, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Shawn Kendall. I'm the program director for game development at Full Sail. I've had a long history in computer graphics, which I'll talk about real briefly here to start because we have some funny pictures. But
yeah, we definitely
there we go. So I started doing computer graphics in virtual reality systems in the 90s. This was on what we called Big Iron, that were SGI, Silicon Graphics machines. They were refrigerator-sized machines. And of course, I was a young boy, as you can see there. But it was interesting because it was like, I think that picture's in '94 when we first started doing this. It was kind of the first wave of VR. Hopefully, a lot of you guys out there have had a chance to do the current wave of VR, which is pretty awesome. By the 2000s, very shortly after that, we were doing all of the same work, but on PCs. So we'd gone from refrigerator-sized machines to, desk-sized machines. That was an amazing transition. We thought that was the fastest it was ever going to be. And then by 2012, when I was working on my master's degree in mobile gaming, we did exactly the same stuff on phones, on cell phones. And of course, I'm talking about something 13 years ago, so now we know the cell phones are even better. I have a folding phone. It's just amazing. The game technology is just, it's like, what a time to be alive. It's crazy, amazing.
Well, and the VR tech has certainly moved past mobile phones, but it's hard to forget the Google VR headsets where you just slid your phone inside of it, and the phone itself could generate.
Yeah, there's actually one hiding right here. Right. I don't know if you can see the side of you, but
right.
Yeah,
you could actually experience VR through the programming on a phone. Yeah. Pretty impressive.
Yeah. We went from running on 220 power out, like your dryer at your house, to batteries. It's amazing. Yeah,
crazy. So what we really want to be able to do here today is a couple of things. I think, of course, we want to be able to showcase some student projects, but we definitely want to sort of create the context for the student projects, because I think one of the things that our students and grads struggle with, and students across the board in this field struggle with, is how to give context to the work that you're doing to effectively show what your skill set is, and then how to do that without spending many millions of dollars and having teams of thousands of people executing on the vision for your game, to make something that feels refined and sort of player facing and ready for the marketplace, right? And that's really not what student projects are designed to do. And so one of the things that I think we should definitely do before we get into the student projects is to explain how we here at Full Sail define the degree tracks. So game development and game design are two very specific skill sets. We use different tools, but they definitely share a lot of features. And part of the reason that we define them the way that we do is because across the board in the industry, this is what we see. We see huge multidisciplinary teams working together to produce games. So,
this little slide up here is really great. It shows, we've got a list of things there, but on the far left you can see there's audio. Of course, we're not part of the audio program, but of course games have audio, including music, and we'll probably touch on that later on because we have this collaborative approach with our projects so that we can work with students in other degrees. Yeah. The second picture there is basically showing what game art would produce. That final look that you're expecting to see in a game that you can capture in a still that is either realistic or looks like the intended intellectual property. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time. We'll probably keep revisiting this, trying to differentiate that for us, because we aren't the game art group. We're really this group of game tech and design. And then, we have like business. There's you guys probably know we have game business degree. It's entertainment and business. Actually, there's several of them. So, of course, that's part of the game program. And that last one there is pure source code, which is what the normal game developer would be generating probably. And that's actually one of the, real world things that's different. When you're a game developer, you are looking at that most of the time. Even the game is really in your head, so we still think it's fun and love it, but that's what game developers look like. Luckily, game designers have a little bit better interface than that. So.
Yeah.
But we all have to work together. Like it's a team, it's not unlike movies where there are people and there are experts in every realm all working together to make this happen.
Right. Well, and I think especially for incoming students who are thinking about entering into any of these degree programs, that even if the path through game development, which really is a software engineering degree, and game design, which really is an Excel spreadsheet and prototyping degree, right? That there are so many paths into the game industry, and the thing that everybody shares is that you just have to be spectacularly good at the skill set that you have chosen, and you have to be able to refine those skills and continue to master the affiliated skill sets so that you can grow in your role in the industry and you can remain competitive. And of course, the requirements for these different roles have really changed over the past couple of decades, and I'm sure will continue to change as the tool sets change and evolve. So, we're focusing today on game development and game design, but if you're interested in any of the other aspects of making games, we have degrees that focus in game art, which is all of the environment. We have computer animation, which focuses primarily on the characters and their movements. UX design, which focuses on player experience, creative writing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of those paths are viable paths into the industry, even if one of these isn't the one for you, right? So, here on I was going to say we do have a slide that helps to, I think, explain what the core differences are between the degree programs. Do you want to speak to game dev first?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one thing to note is that game dev is considered a computer science degree, which is an engineering degree that has a certain kind of rigor to it that's specific to engineering degrees. So that means that it typically involves more math and more programming of all of the degrees that Full Sail has, and I would say of degrees in general, it's the most programming heavy of them. I think it's considered the top programming heavy. So if you have done programming, you're on track. If you haven't done programming, it doesn't mean that there's a problem, but you definitely need to know if you like programming. And we might talk more about the details of programming, what that means. But programming is the main thing. And the other thing is that we like to say, to help clarify, we build game technology. So when people are talking about like, hey, I want to make a game. Okay, well, we need to break that into pieces. And one of the pieces is the fundamental game technology. And you can see on this slide, it has a list of the courses that gives you an idea of the breakdown. There's collision in there and physics, engine development. These are programming and math-centric courses. Those icons are kind of interesting. In particular, you can see there's an Unreal icon. I know the prospective students out there probably recognize every one of them. Always have fun with parents because the parents are like, I'm not sure of this, and their kids all know every one of those. But
right.
And they're like, I think I spent too much on that top one, but I don't know. But Unreal is an engine. The next below it is Unity is an engine. Those are game engines. That's the kind of things we build. So we learn to use those engines, but we learn to integrate into them. We learn to extend them. And our primary tool, to be totally clear, is Visual Studio. So for those of you who are wondering, like, well, what does this really mean? We're using Visual Studio programming C++. And that's about as deep as we'll get into it today. But, if you got Q&A, you can ask us later on.
Yeah, and you have a phrase that I think summarizes what the outcomes are from game development really well. You like to say that your primary task is building game technology.
Yeah.
And that's both at the engine level, right? Adding new capabilities to what a game engine can do, as well as with an existing game, building custom tools that either optimize the game for playability or allow designers to use those tools to more easily prototype things like mechanics and features inside of an
Right,
engine.
yeah. A good concrete example is a game designer might be tasked with making a new type of weapon system for a game. Let's just say some type of gun and ammo. And And it turns out it's non-trivial as much as we all play games and think it's simple. But, you know, they have to decide the ammo, how much they damage, how the projectile moves, all of these things a designer's going to work on. Once they have a working prototype and then they've tested it and the team all says this is what we do want and this is the tough one and it's fun. That's another thing I always like to define. Like, game designers have to deal with whether something's fun or not. Game developers maybe not so much. We don't have to worry about if it's fun.
Works.
It works. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's better.
Right, exactly.
Then they might say, okay, yeah, this is the exact gun we want, but we have a new, we changed our design and we need an army of 10 of these guys using this gun. And so then you might go, oh gosh, that's the way I designed it's not scalable. And they might have a game developer re-implement the gun. So you'd actually have the entire instructions and I know how it should work. And in fact, when I'm done, it would work the exact same way, which is kind of funny.
Right.
Like, it seems like you didn't do anything, but now I can do hundreds of these instead of one. You know, it's really great.
Right, exactly.
Optimization is a critical one, and debugging and fixing bugs is a critical one for game developers.
Yeah. And I think that it's very easy for game designers, you know, in this day and age, to believe that their primary task is just coming up with all of those ideas and then, you know, handing that fully fleshed out Excel sheet over to a game developer and saying, okay, go code the game. Yeah. Right. And there certainly was a time when game designers' primary output was, you know, Word documents and Excel spreadsheets, but that has changed thanks to the game engines that are readily available. Yeah. And, you know, and that obviously today we're really talking primarily about Unreal because that's the tool that we use in our degree programs, but it's true for RPG Maker, it's true for Twine. We're just using the tools that are there to rapidly prototype the player's experience. Yeah. So while there's a lot of planning that has to go into that, whether that's, you know, articulating which characters have which abilities and how they progress through certain skill sets, how they level up, all of those things, you know, that's still going into an Excel spreadsheet. But the only way in this day and age to actually communicate those design principles to an audience, to a potential employer, to a potential investor is to build a demo or a rapid prototype of the game. And so, you know, that's what we'll be looking in the second half of the episode is really looking at those game demos that are being made in these programs. But I think it's important to recognize that, you know, in Full Sail's version of game design, it is all happening in engine, and anything that you design on paper is being implemented in engine. So, I did drop that little, I do want to just take a moment for a little bit of a brag. We're very excited. The Unreal Engine academic partner badges were just announced for 2025, and our game programs at Full Sail are now gold badge academic partners. So we're super, super proud of that. It's a big accomplishment. There are a lot of people who have been involved in helping us get there. And obviously, we're huge fans of Unreal Engine, and we use it in multiple degree programs for a reason. And that a lot of that is because those in-engine tools that designers need to use are so accessible. And the availability of that, you know, AAA quality game engine for anybody who has a good enough computer to be able to run it has totally changed the landscape of game making. But, you know, as you can see from our key courses, we're really diving into design techniques that you see in modern gaming. So we're designing systems, of course, in the systems design, game balancing, game systems integration classes. We're designing mechanics in the game mechanics classes and experimenting with the ways in which those can shift based on the platform that you're using or your audience. And so, you know, we're really using the tools that are built into the engine that game developers are making to rapidly prototype those player-facing experiences.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the tool, the game engine, which is our fundamental tool for both of us, really. Yeah. But in the case of game designers, it's like it's your way of communicating. Like, it is the way you need to communicate now. Right. Yeah, you have to communicate with an interactable, playable, demonstratable thing. Right. With game dev, that may be the case. This is kind of interesting because maybe our final demonstrations will be something that's in Unreal and looks like a playable. But since our guys are building fundamental technologies for their final technical works, it could be something that's not quite demonstratable.
Right.
Because it could be a piece of software or a type of API that connects to some backend and something that's not really visualizable but is reusable and understood that needs to be the system. I will say one other thing is that in game dev, we learn to program graphics. So whereas I said we program C++, the one other thing we do is program GPUs or using shaders. And so this one can get confusing to people, but in game dev, you program graphics, but you're not an artist, so you're not making art.
Right. Not graphic design, not digital art.
Yeah, it's
right.
like we are building the rendering systems that the designers and artists use. And
you gave me an example, I think, in a previous conversation where you're talking about like what kind of task a game developer might do in the context of a game. You were talking about the difference between like the built-in sort of default systems and the custom systems.
Right. So, you use an engine like Unreal, and of course it's in Unreal's interest to give you every possible feature, and they're constantly adding features. But if you make a game, as a company that only uses the stock features, then your game might not be that interesting to the market because everyone's seen everything that's in it. So usually a game has something that's unique and different they try to add. And collision is a really good example. It could be that the default collision system in Unreal just doesn't quite do, maybe in your game you need more jelly physics or something. You have we're going to see a splatty game later on, it visually looks neat, but I kept thinking about like how would awesome if there was actually some sort of goo that you got stuck in, And that's something that a game developer might have to do, because they'd say, listen, you don't need to know what the IP is. You don't need to know what movie or book this is tied to.
Right.
But I need you to make objects that are sticky and squishy. And because that's computationally intensive, we might have to use new techniques and research it and all that kinds of stuff. Yeah. That's like a perfect example. So we'd make that, and then the game designer is going to use that in their levels to build whatever they want.
Right. The player-facing part of the experience. Yeah. One of the ways that I think one of the big outcomes for us, for graduates of our degree program as game designers, is what we really want them to be able to do, because this is one of the major demands that you're going to face in the industry, is being able to say, okay, who's my player audience and how do I design to please that player audience, right? Oftentimes we're under the misimpression that what we get to design is kind of whatever we want for ourselves as the player. But really, in the industry, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, who is this title for? What platform is it going to be on? How do we design for that? So the difference between, for example, designing, a military simulation training experience and like a K through 12 educational game, those are two totally separate, totally distinct players with totally different needs out of an experience, either of which could be built in Unreal and designed by a game designer.
Yeah.
And being attentive to the needs of those players and the specific platform that players are going to be playing on if you're doing training, maybe you're not playing really, but the tools that your user is going to be interfacing with is a big part of the design choices that you're making. Yeah. So I think that now is a good time for us to bring up a couple of, a handful. We've handpicked some final projects. I wanted to give a little bit of context before we dive into the first video. So in the game design program, the final project sequence of classes is 5 classes over 4 months. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our accelerated programming, we like to squash an entire semester's worth of content into a 4-month term. 4-week term. Mm-hmm. So the final project is 4 months where the teams of students go from a concept for a game and a core mechanic prototype, which they get to build. And then they form teams, oftentimes collaboratively with game development or game art. We've also worked with students in the recording arts program, graphic arts, creative writing, sort of across the board from the other degree programs in the university. But they have to get from that really blank page concept development all the way through a publishable prototype or demo. And so
this is like they start fresh, but this is after they've learned all their essentially they're close to academically complete.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the idea is that they're going to have this opportunity to showcase everything that they've learned in the form of this final project. And I think that these projects that we've selected for today do a really good job of showcasing the things that we're focusing on in these degrees. So what you're not going to see in many of these game trailers is finished art.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of them look great.
Some of them have them because they use the art.
Some of it has custom art, and of course, depending on their collaboration with the game artists, that is either totally coherent across the entire game. There might be custom elements that have been designed just to bring across very specific kinds of ideas within the game. But they're really focusing on the playability and its function, right? And being able to showcase all of that design work that they've built into, all the systems that they have designed in those Excel spreadsheets and the levels that chunk up those systems so that players can navigate through the systems and clearly progress with very specific goals in mind. Yeah. I think we should bring up the first video because it really, this does a really good job of showing what some of these final project teams have done and done really well. So
this is Beyond the Jump.
Yes, this game is called Beyond the Jump. As you can see, these are not professionally produced game trailers, and that's nothing on the designers. Again, our area of focus isn't on the presentation of the game in this video form. This is really just a thing that they're required to do as part of the publishing.
Yeah, so it's captured,
Right.
So this is, I like to start this off because this is the most recognizable probably play mechanic to everybody out there. This is a behind the player 3D parkour / traditional platformer with collectibles. They even went out of the trouble. I mean, for a final project, it's amazing. They made a snow world and a different world.
Yeah.
This is called placeholder art. We also call it blocking. And in fact, some of the art may be from artists, but that's not the goal for our guys. Because I definitely was like, they did a really good job in lighting in this and stuff, but it's not really the job of designers. The job of them is to make it so this level is fun and challenging and interesting, and makes you want to go in the right places. I know there's all kinds of psychology you guys learn to guide players through the world. Right.
That's a lot of the level design techniques that students are going to learn. And I think that this game, again, is a really good example of the implementation of levels. Obviously, in the gameplay trailer, we're not getting a complete walkthrough of the game, so we can't see the progression illustrated, but they have a user interface that's communicating clearly with the player about what their objectives are, and it's not final, but it's clear what it's intended to communicate. This is just sort of a classically designed. They didn't invent a new wheel.
Right.
They used existing, mechanics and gameplay styles to just do a really effective implementation of these ideas. And I think that that's strategic and smart on the part of this team, because the idea that, it has occasionally happened that you might stumble upon some interesting juxtaposition of different styles, different platforms, different point of view, for the player, where you might stumble upon an entirely new game mechanic. But you're probably not going to do that. And honestly, stressing yourself out right before graduation of I need to invent an entirely new kind of game to play, that's really not even the objective.
Right.
So I think that, while you might argue that they kind of played it safe in terms of the aesthetic choices or the narrative choices, again, that's not what we're teaching.
Yeah.
That's not what we're focusing on. So they did a really smart thing by doing an incredibly effective job of implementing the design work.
Yeah. It's when I see it, it's clear to me that they play tested it a lot too. This is another difference between game design and dev, because dev doesn't really play test. We have to test the components that we build in sort of artificial environments or test beds that test them in certain ways that are code based, which usually means like performance testing and like quality testing and this kind of thing. But like
you guys have to worry about stuff like file sizes and
and
compression.
Memory and any of the bugs that we have can be like catastrophic. Like we can't have failures because that can take the whole system down. So there's like this kind of testing that's not visual. Yeah. But like when I see the whoever did the playing of that game, it was obviously one of the teams. I mean, there's no question that they played the heck out of it because. For those of you guys who play platformers, like these platformers are placed exactly at the limit of what's possible to jump and all that. And the only way they can do that is by testing it out, planning it. I mean, I shouldn't say the only way, but they know the limits of it because they designed it. So they have some idea and then they have to play it to make sure it's right. And it looked really smooth and clean. And I like that. It's a really great demo to start off. And also it does show you artwork that doesn't look completely placeholder, but it gives you an idea of what we meant by placeholder artwork. Yeah. Like the backgrounds had form, but they weren't super detailed.
Right.
Yeah. Which is
and it's evocative. It doesn't, it again, if you're not trying to showcase your game art and VFX skills, which we're not, then the placeholder art is totally effective. And again, part of the reason why we used Unreal is because of the availability of those assets, materials, textures, etc., that you can build into your game, where it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Again, if you're trying to showcase your design or the game technology that developers are building. Let's take a look at the next trailer, and we're not going to talk over this one.
Right. Mm-hmm. It has a little explanation that's really quite nice.
Yeah, I think that they did quite a good job with this trailer. Let's look at the Gentleman Thief.
Ah, the sweet sound of opportunity. And maybe just a tiny bit of broken glass. Welcome to the Gentleman Thief. Stealth is your stage, and every heist is a performance. Avoid the lights, charm the crowd, and exit like a phantom. Of course, no masterpiece is without its challenges. A splash here, a broom there, it's all part of the dance. Stay sharp, stay silent, or at least try to. When the walls close in, remember, style is everything. Now, how will you make your escape? Bravo, my friend. Bravo. Now, who's next on the guest list?
Such a great student project. Definitely let that keep rolling because I'll make some comments about it.
Yeah, we can certainly have it play while we're chatting. I think they did a really good job with this trailer. It clearly shows all of maybe not the entirety of the mechanics that are available in the game, but a huge selection of them. It very clearly shows what the objective of the game is. I think that they've done an excellent job here. The everything from the theme to the execution of the different mechanics that the player character can use, I think is great. It's clearly been inspired by a bunch of different kinds of games, although it's not similar to Beyond the Jump. They're not trying to create an entirely new genre of game. They're not trying to invent mechanics. What they've done is they've taken mechanics that are kind of already out there in the industry and games that we're already familiar with, and they've just combined them in a way that makes for a very well executed student project.
Yeah, these guys. So this game has a lot of complex mechanics. And I'm not going to call them out every scene. Maybe you guys are watching this can see them. Like it goes pretty quick. It's kind of amazing. But so first of all, when the character's walking around, if you notice, there's like these rings that shoot out. So that's the noise of the walking, and that will alert the people around it. So there's this great visual feedback that if you walk too fast, so I'm sure you guys know, if you walk fast, you make sounds in the game, you can trigger guards. This is a common theme, but the way they did this game is they added this visual. And whether or not the final visual would be like that, it doesn't matter. It's that they know they needed to put some kind of indicator, and you can see that's also making a sound to call the guards. So that's high-level ideas that are really cool. Meanwhile, these designers had to get in there and make these NPCs with all of their state behaviors that are doing their patrolling and being alerted. Not the level layout. I mean, this is a huge project, and it's got lots going on. It's really so. This is 100%, as far as we know, design project. So if a developer was called in to work on this, a perfect example of what the developer might have to do is, it could be that they would go in one of the rooms, let's say it's some kind of larger open space where there's like maybe 10 or 15 guards that could be triggered. And it could be that the way they built it, it's going to start slowing down because there's just too many guards trying to navigate and all this kind of stuff. And a game developer would come in and go, okay, you guys made this work, but I can see how if I re-implement some of what you did in blueprints in C++, then we can get the performance out of it. That's a perfect example of what a developer might do. In that case, the game wouldn't change in any way. It would just be faster. They wouldn't be contributing. But another way would be like those rings. So I noticed those sound rings. So the designers put in those rings to give the effect of a sound effect. It might be that the art designer says, you know what, I want this to be really interesting. I want this to be some sort of wobbly effect on the screen, and that would actually end up being graphics programming.
Right.
And the entire effect that the game developer would be made is that somehow distort in a circular way that the game doesn't support immediately in an efficient way, or some cone or something like that. So it's kind of weird how different what a developer might do, something that's very, very different things. But that's the skill set because it's the things that are low level in the engine.
Well, and you also mentioned blueprints, which I think I didn't really highlight before, but we're both using Unreal Engine in game development and game design, but we are using two different aspects of the engine, almost without overlap.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's two different programming interfaces in Unreal, and it's not. I mean, there are many great reasons to Unreal, but it is one of the great reasons why we use it, because in game development, we use the C++ interface to Unreal, and in design, you guys use the blueprint, and you can talk about what the blueprint interface is.
Yeah, so, blueprint is the Unreal Engine term for their visual scripting language. And for lay people, I like to call visual scripting coding for dummies, because it is really a node and wire-based system where the nodes just represent sometimes little blocks of code, sometimes massive blocks of code, but they're elements of the engine that are already pre-programmed so that a game designer can come in and quickly prototype interactable elements of an experience. And so
really quickly prototype them and iterate on it if they need to make minor changes, which when you're programming is non-trivial. Like for us, when we make minor changes in Unreal, there's a significant delay in our ability to test it, whereas blueprints, it's just like boom, 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 boom. I mean, actually, you can kind of like play it live. You can change blueprints while you're in the middle of doing stuff.
Absolutely, You and it allows you to test things essentially in real time. Which is a huge advantage, obviously, when you're on a 4-month development cycle and you're like, oh, well, was that the right jump height? Let me just go into the blueprint. I can change this number, move this slider, and all of a sudden the effect is quite different. And, for the purposes of playtesting and shooting for that fun, I think that's, one of the things I like to say to students who are entering the game design program is we operate like scientists, right? Fun is maybe a subjective experience, but as game designers, we're just hypothesizing about what we think will be fun in a game, but we don't know anything until it's tested. You have to prototype it. I might have the most brilliant game concept floating in my head, but until I can get it out there in front of players and prove through testing that it is fun, not just for me, not just for you, and not just for my team, but for 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. That's really what you're looking for. Obviously, we're not playtesting with 10,000 people, although anyone is invited to playtest.
Yeah, well, we automate some playtesting. It's kind of like that. Almost,
Right. Let's move on to the next game trailer. This is called Lunar Lumens from Team Oyster Nation. The reason I pulled this one in particular, again, we have placeholder graphics here. A lot of this should be pretty familiar if you've been playing around with any of Unreal's prefab assets. But what I think is really, I know, Shawn, you really liked this game. What I really like about this game is I think it does an excellent job of showing players the game system that was designed. And I think for game designers, and particularly students who are looking to build that final portfolio piece as an entree into the industry, we often forget how critical it is to show players the information that we are keeping track of, that we're looking at, that are important for the player to know about so that they can progress towards the game's objective. And, you know, again, the more we talk about it, the more it kind of sounds like science, right? The less it sounds like, oh, yeah, we're making it.
This one's real. I think of all of the games, this one, so you can see there's blocks of text on the screen, there's blocks of text in the world, and there's they have UI, and they have a UI that opens up and does more stuff. So, like, of all the games we have, you can see they're really utilizing an information system more than anything. Like, there's some platformer stuff here. When he goes to fight this boss, it's a
turn-based.
It's a turn-based. Yes, it's turn-based combat. So like, there's your typical UI stuff there.
I like that they've shown the progression of the enemies here in the game trailer too. So you're going from that really harmless-looking bat to this guy that's clearly, you know, a boss battle.
I definitely feel like when the students worked on this, they knew exactly what they wanted to make. They're like, I want to make this combat system. I want to make you be able to pick around in them. And it really works good. Like, I've watched it a bunch of times, and I don't see any kind of glitchy motion or anything. So that it's really clean. And this interface is really great. So I can't really make too many nitpicks about it. Well, if we have time, we have some other we'll nitpick about it. But yeah, they did it. I mean, this is one of the ones where they used, they're using placeholder art, and it has like a more mishmashy mess than some of the other placeholder art. But you can see when an artist would get their hands on it, they could really polish it up. But the gameplay mechanics and the interaction and stuff definitely look intriguing. Like, I see it, and I definitely go, I don't know, I want to try this. I want to play this. I want to see what happens. How do I get to that boss exactly, and how do I fight him? So
yeah, and I think this game, like a lot of the games that we see from students, are inspired by games that the students like, and the games that are popular when they're going through their degree program. You know, and that's normal.
That's
right?
what I mean. Yeah, you want to for sure. That's what they should do. I mean, the other thing is it's what they're
scratch when you can design based on something you know is going to work. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's usually like, we try to allow this because it's going to be what they're passionate about after they have done a significant amount of work to get to this stage. They have worked very hard, and part of their reward is being able to say, okay, I know you had to make a lot of what we wanted you to make. Now you can make the specific thing you want to. And I mean, when you do that, of course, their passion is high, and they work really hard. So,
all right, I've got a trailer that has a pretty clear inspiration source, but I think they've done some interesting things. Can we pull up Art of Escape, please? I think Shawn will be able to guess what the game is that inspired this particular student project. This one.
So I got a first-person shooter.
Right.
Oh yeah, but looks like colored paints everywhere. Oh yes, yeah.
It's okay. You can guess early.
Like an arena shooter. Yeah, this is like Splatoon, the old classic from the. Yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, that looks nice.
Yeah, look at all that goop. That's great. So yeah, clearly Splatoon was one of the sources of inspiration for this. I love that they took that idea and went, okay, multiplayer battle royale has been done, right? That's what Splatoon was.
Yeah.
And this is first person, which is a great way to just immediately twist the player's experience, right? Rather than a multiplayer co-op game, this is solo, or at least
and I see
for the purposes of this demo, it's solo.
Yeah, and there's like a timer there, so it looks like they're racing to get through the level or something.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so, obviously when you're not playing against other players, that requires you to, hey, big up to Taffy Frog for the credits. Dear students, when you are working on your final portfolio pieces, please do not forget the credits.
They even credited the audio. That's
right.
great.
They credited the version of Unreal Engine that they were using. This is incredibly thorough. Yeah. So they made a great game trailer.
Yeah.
I love seeing the credits. Obviously, that's just well thought out. And again, a strategic move. This may not be the best game that you ever make. Arguably, it's going to be the worst game that you've ever made, right?
Right.
Because it's just the very
yeah,
beginning. It's the first step of your career, right? It's only meant to show what you've mastered so far. And if we know one thing, it's that the game industry skills are going to evolve. Yeah. You're going to walk out the door of your degree and be like, oh no, I have new things to learn, like on day one, right? So, but by including the credits, by including all of these elements of the game, and doing such a good job of these, sort of editor level fly-throughs of the game that's not necessarily gameplay, they've been able to showcase very clearly this game, and then it's got long-term appeal in your portfolio because you still have the credits. It's always going to be part of your game making history.
I mean, this is kind of neat too, because even though it's obviously inspired by games like Splatoon, like it's immediately recognizable too. Yeah. Like it still has a look. I mean, it's kind of neat. Like you immediately identify those.
They did a good job. So let's pull up the next video. Once the credits have rolled, for Dragonvania. Clearly, the inspiration for Dragonvania is not hard to guess. But, as we were talking about, the goal here in the final project is to showcase what you've mastered and to be able to implement the design ideas that you have in some playable experience. And so I think oftentimes we see games from students that are what we would sort of say are derivative, right? Where it's copying mechanics, but it's not. This is clearly an homage to Castlevania. It is. They have taken all of the important design elements from that game and they've innovated in just these little areas, right? By making your player character this baby dragon, by incorporating that sort of narrative element into it. But it's still, and obviously it's built in 3D, even if it looks 2.5, and we still have that kind of side scroller element to it that's from Castlevania. But
and this one definitely looks like game art was on the team.
Yeah. Well, so for most of the teams, they have at least one artist that has a term, a single term to work with them. So
it just depends on depends on what they're going to be able to contribute.
Right. So that really their sort of bandwidth has a lot of effect on that. Let's pull up the next video, the next gameplay trailer for Gravity Grid. This is another one that I think does a great kind of inspired by, and then makes small innovations to the gameplay, right?
Yeah,
so
this is our total homage to Wipeout series from the 2000s. Right. Even before that was games called F-Zero.
Right.
It's a futuristic racer, hover
Shawn,
racer.
Do you remember pole position?
So, I think I actually think I have like so this is funny because I don't have my gear all hooked up at home because I'm sharing with my kids and stuff, but I almost am positive I have the VR version of Wipeout at home and I still haven't ever played it because I just never got
Tragedy.
it. I know.
Such a good game. But so again, I think that they've done a really good job with this racing game. In a racing game, there's obviously a wide range from, Forza to something like Mario Kart, but I think that they've really done an excellent job of prototyping the critical elements, which is, obviously there's the steering component, but no racing game is fun without the experience of speed. And I think that they've done an incredibly good job of conveying that. I also think that the way that they've played around with the physics by making this track go vertical, and through the loop-de-loops.
Yeah, there's definitely some tricks they're having to do to pull that off because the default system isn't going to make them suck to the road like that. Right. So that's a good example of so this is one of those things where maybe the designers, they had to go out of their way with blueprints to get that done. And then maybe if you're saying, I want to race against 20 other players, now the game developer has to come in and implement that so that it runs efficiently. Because I have no idea how they did that. The default system's not going to do that at all.
Yeah.
So they definitely
Yeah.
did something interesting.
Yeah. So again, like all these games that are kind of inspired by game genres that are already successful, where you don't have to invent everything from scratch, but you can focus on the little elements that you can innovate on, and where you can showcase your particular talents or the specific design sort of spin that you want to put on that classic game genre. I think it does an excellent job of doing that. All right. We're definitely getting down towards the Q&A, but we have a couple more projects that I think we'd like to share. The next one up is called Poltergeist Party. Try to say that 3 times fast.
Oh, this is like so unique. This game is crazy.
Yeah. So
clearly placeholder heart. So right out of the gate, you can see like,
right.
So these characters at first, like the first time I saw this, I was like, okay, I was a little distracted by the characters. But if you guys, it's not like the aesthetic isn't super hot VR. That's not the intent. It's just that, again, the designers are like, give me a character so I can put it in place because I'm working on this other complicated problem.
Let's find
this is
a super simple way to
Yeah.
differentiate them so it doesn't look like there's one person standing around
Yeah.
a room in 100 different places, right? So they've chosen those really simple kind of ways to distinguish between these different bodies. But, as sort of rough as some of the elements are, like this where you're sort of going through walls and that kind of thing, like that wouldn't be in the finished product, right? That element of it you would find a better transition, those kinds of things would change. And instead of worrying about all of that aspect of the presentation, what they focused on and what they clearly play tested a whole lot are these mechanics, right? So the ability for you to occupy these different bodies, to have the player character change form. I mean,
which is
have
again
the
not
player
supported.
character
It's
jump
not,
from one 3D asset to another.
It's not a default. It's not
right.
the engines
That's
don't
not
support that out of the
built in.
can. Yeah,
Right.
they have to go. They had to go in and really set up a system where they could change the controlling of these different characters.
Yeah. And what I don't know whether this is true, and I certainly wouldn't make any accusations about this team, but I feel like one of the elements, the sort of witch's ability, to sink into the floor and to go past different traps, that's like one of those magical moments where something didn't work properly, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! We clearly have to make this a mechanic."
Yeah, like play testing at the design level is the
yeah.
only place you find that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's like that, obviously they may have intended it that way, but it's just a great example of like capitalize on your mistakes kind of where you can, because when, because a lot of the times those mechanical innovations that you see in games really are coming out of like, how do we make this work? And you either, have to toss the whole thing, or you just use what you have and then you make it a design element, right? Like that's the dirty secret of the game design side of things. All right, last but not least, let's show Tumbleweeds and Turrets. And this is a great one to wrap things up with.
Yeah, this game looks fun right out of the gate.
I think if you guys would bring up the sound, it's so charming. Very nice. Very nice. So,
So tower defense, the classic, at this point, a classic genre.
right.
They decided to add a first-person shooter element to it, and then said, well, we need some kind of theme, because really it could be any theme.
Right.
So they wrapped a theme on it. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, who doesn't love a, steampunk cyborg marriage with Wild West theme? I mean, I won't bother mentioning the classic film from the early 2000s. But anyway, so I think that Tumbleweeds and Turrets is incredibly successful as a final project. It's very strategic. Again, they've chosen familiar genres. They've juxtaposed them into a single game, which is where you get really interesting things happening in the game industry. And you see a lot of titles, especially now, using this approach design-wise, because it is so difficult to invent a new core game mechanic, and even if you are a programmer and you can use C++ to make the engine do anything that you want, you still have to have a design intention that's going to drive the invention of a mechanic, right? And most games don't really require that. So by choosing these different components, right, having to build the turrets, to construct them from multiple pieces. This is a lot of programming that's happening.
Yeah, it's really kind of nuts.
And visual scripting that's happening.
They have the most complex NPCs.
Yeah, there's clearly, they clearly have this whole scalable enemy, system in place. Each one of the robots, it clearly has a different ability or has a different damage threshold, and you see that throughout this game, and I think that this is definitely one of the more successful ones. And other than the fact that gameplay trailer was lacking credits, I think it was pretty solid.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It looks good, and I want to play it to see how far you can go in those levels for sure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there wasn't a lot of turret construction in the gameplay trailer, so I'm definitely curious to see how that mechanic works, how much you have to sort of search around for the different elements and how you collect them. Do you have an inventory limit? Lots of questions.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what a gameplay trailer is designed to do.
Right,
It's to tease you. It's to give you just enough of a taste of what's going to be in the game so that you want to play the whole thing and you don't think you've got it already figured out.
The other thing I love about that one is that
great portfolio piece.
I don't know what, if any, of that art came from game art students, but even in the trailer, the blocking is so clear and clean. Like which is the point. Like you should be able to go in there and make sense of what you're seeing. And it means that some of the stuff color-wise is like kind of jumping out or a little different, but that's exactly what you need at the design phase where you're deciding for sure this is how I want the game to be. So
right, and then you let the artist take over and make it look pretty. Cool. Well, thanks for looking through all those projects with me, Shawn. And
good stuff.
Yeah, I sure hope all those teams were watching so they can keep developing their project. No, I'm just kidding. They're all employed now in the industry.
Right.
So let's switch to some questions. It looks like we have one, and I can read the question. I feel like this one is for you.
I guess it must be for me.
All right, so the question says, do you miss the days with VCRs and 8-bit consoles? How can you tell we're that old? Question asker.
So the first thing is that
this
Never
heard of a VCR.
This has to be a parent that's asking that question, because what prospective student is asking that question?
What viewer is old enough to remember a VCR?
So no, I don't miss it. VCR, like I wouldn't even comment on that. Like we only made that stuff better so fast it's not even funny. Like certainly, but the thing about 8-bit consoles is kind of interesting. So I'm sure if you're following games, like people love pixel art and like in all kinds of different nostalgia ways. And boy, oh boy, if you go on the internet, there is so many amazing projects of every ilk that encapsulate that. And I'll give you a prime example because, they pegged me, from Sing Bob. Yeah. But yes, within the last month, I did watch a long video about a complete redo of Pac-Man on the 2600. Like that people programmed with the latest technology and made it work on the old Atari. The 2600 was an Atari system. I should have noted that. Who would know what the 2600 was? The original Atari. The original Atari Pac-Man is like a disaster. You can look that up. It's a notoriously awful thing. And they figured out how to like almost reproduce it perfectly. And here's the even crazier part. They demonstrated at game conferences.
Yeah.
And the original creator of the Pac-Man came and gave it his seal of appeal,
Oh.
seal of approval. So these people are still out there alive, messing around with that stuff.
You know, there's nothing wrong with making a game using 8-bit graphics. I mean, there are plenty of them out there on Steam, on itch.io. You know, plenty of games. I think the real benefit from a design standpoint is why.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
why choose pixels? Why choose that that aesthetic style? If there's a reason for it, if there's a design intention, in the old days, you had no other option. Mm-hmm. That was as good as your graphics were going to get. Now it's an aesthetic choice, like using watercolors or markers, right?
Sure.
And so I love that it's still in the marketplace because of that. Because
well, and
it's still a choice.
The mechanics of the original games still show up. I mean, I said Pac-Man, but Pac-Man is a collection game.
Right.
It's just they said we're eating dots, but the games now are the same. You're led through the world by collecting, picking
coins
up collectibles,
or ammo or whatever.
and other power-ups. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of mechanics that are timeless because it really comes from human psychology, and that's why it's always there.
Right.
Yeah.
And the design choices from a gameplay standpoint had to be really solid and really playable because they could not rely on photoreal graphics and, awesome explosion VFX and stuff to hide the design choices that weren't there. Let's go to the next question. It says, so I have a bachelor's in computer science from another college. I am currently getting my degree in game design. Whoop, whoop. Do you think it is worth it to spend some time to learn game development and or game art? Not right now. I feel like you have a pretty full plate.
I would say if you do have a computer science degree from another school, you could utilize that on your own.
Yeah.
In the game design program. But you know what? Here's the thing. When you take your game design classes, just put your back into it.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I would say. Like so you have technical knowledge that is going to be leverageable in the game design degree. Right. You could learn game development, and by that I mean programming in Unreal with C++. If you felt like you wanted to have that as a skill set, and if you know C++ already, that might not be difficult, and it'd be great to have on a resume for sure.
For sure.
But if you already have a computer science degree, that you're in good shape.
Yeah,
you know what?
If you want
to talk about this, if you're a student right now, you reach out to us. We'll talk to you more about it.
Yeah,
You contact me or Phoebe. We'll give you a call or something to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for offering that up, Shawn. We'll put his email on the. No, I'm kidding. All right, so but yeah, you should absolutely hit us up. But I think that also plenty of other colleges would say that computer science plus game design is game development.
Yep, I agree.
Right? I mean, so, you're still you have that fundamental foundation. That's amazing. The fact that you're getting a degree in game design just means that now you can put that programming to use towards your design intent, right? And that allows you to kind of straddle both worlds. So for gameplay programming or gameplay engineering kind of tasks, that's a great, cooperative skill set to have. All right. My main question is, if I intend straying away from the industry scene and taking an independent approach to creating games, what program is best for someone looking to develop well-rounded skills? Okay, so...
are you asking what program at Full Sail,
I'm guessing that they mean which degree program, but I want to address this first, which is to say that independent games aren't part of the industry is incorrect. The industry... At this point, I would say, especially facilitated by 3D rendering software like Unreal, the industry goes all the way from, mobile gaming and web games all the way to AAA, PC, and console games. So that for sure includes indie games in that umbrella. If you're looking for... part of the reason that we define the degrees the way that we do at Full Sail is because there are, let's put it this way, the degree that you graduate from is your starter skill set. When you go into the industry, you will not stop learning. You will not yet have mastered everything that you're ever going to need to know to continue to do your job. Back in the old days, I was delivering design documentation in Microsoft Word and Excel. And now I cannot deliver any paper documentation. It has to be implemented in a game engine. So over the past 20 years, I've had to learn how to use a game engine because there's no other option, right? So I think your skill set will continue to evolve, and being well-rounded, AKA like I want to make my own game from scratch all by myself, the number of skills that you would need to acquire on that journey, there is no one degree program that teaches you all of them.
Yeah. So I like to, so this isn't quite your question, but it seems like it's kind of in the same vein. And I get this question a lot, so it might help a lot of people, going into any kind of entertainment, people want to, they have passion, and they probably have a creative design in mind. They have something they want to build, right? I mean, this is true for filmmakers and writers and every kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in the game world, the kind of catch-all space where people kind of feel safe to pursue that, or it's possible, is the indie game scene.
Right.
Here's what I tell people, which is not what everyone wants to hear, but at least it's an option. It's a pathway. So there's a great analogy with a restaurant. So you could say, I want to start my own restaurant. That's what I want to do. And my advice would be, go work at the best restaurant you can get a job at, and keep improving what restaurant you work at for, say, 5 years. Mm-hmm. And after you've done that, you should know every way that a restaurant gets run. And so you will have the final skill set that would let you make your own restaurant. And so this is the same kind of advice I would give to game developer. It's like, if you want to be an indie developer, you don't have to give up that dream. But your best bet is to go to a game company, watch what they do right, watch what they do wrong. Yeah. And then this is the interesting part that makes it difficult, because sometimes people like to stay there, or they change their goals. But if you're still really committed, then go to a different game company. Yeah. And do the same thing. Like, you literally want to work at multiple companies so you can see all the ways that everything can be done right and wrong. And then you will have a blueprint that is contextually accurate, that is active and alive at the moment you want to make it. When you leave Full Sail, we are teaching you a skill set so that you can make games in the industry. But making an independent game company is not a completely different skill set, but it is a superset of that.
Yeah. Well, and I like the restaurant analogy, because if you want to start a restaurant, you don't have to be a chef, a dishwasher, a waiter, a host.
Right.
The financier,
you have to get them.
the farmer. You don't have to know all of those things to open a restaurant. You need to know how to get all of those things at a high level. But if what you're interested in is the building of the studio, there is a skill set for that. That's production and business. And unfortunately, if you want to make a commercially viable game, that's how you do it.
And similar to a restaurant, you would have to operate in the negative for like 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, a successful restaurant has to be expected to lose for year after year, and so would a startup game studio.
Right.
So that may not... I don't want that to be a negative spin, but it's a realistic approach. There is a path, and it's doable. But I don't want to tell people, oh, okay, once I know how to make games, I know how to make a game company, because the industry is just bigger than that now.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at the next question. I have my own game with art and design, but feasible in terms of functions and playability. I'm guessing this is without art. I don't understand this question. Would it be appropriate to showcase as my portfolio?
I
guess it depends what kind of role you're really looking for in the industry.
Yeah.
So if what you're trying to show is your fabulous art and you're, your playable experience lacks that, then I would say probably don't put that in your portfolio. But if you are a designer or a developer, and I will say plenty of the developers do make games as part of their final project, but they're making games in the absence of instruction about game design. And that's okay. I mean, hey, the entire industry is based on programmers designing games from the beginning. So it's not like these, when these paths separated, it's not been that long. I think it's really, and for a lot of what we showed here today, it's about creating the context for what you're showing people in this playable experience. What do you want them to know that you made, right? And that, for example, a lot of students, after they graduate, they look back on their final project game and they go, oh God, it doesn't have finished art, and, our sound sucks, or whatever it is. And they sort of go, oh, that doesn't really show the level of refinement that I have in my head. And so if you just present it to somebody without the context of, here's this thing I made on a team in 4 months, and what I'm trying to showcase to you is this, this skill progression tree through this block mesh demo, that's great. When you're talking to somebody who's in the industry, who knows what skills they're hiring for, that's not a disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's especially as a designer or a developer, being able to say, this is what I know how to do. Look, here's me doing it. That's a lot of the story of getting your first job, getting your foot in, right? Is being able to say, okay, this is my primary skill set. This is how I've demonstrated to you that I have this primary skill set.
All right, I'm going to ask you this one since it says
game
design.
Go for it.
All right, it says, for game design, post-graduation, what scale of project should I focus on? It feels hard to do something like a capstone again myself.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, if anything teaches you that games are made by multidisciplinary teams, it's 4 months trying to work with a multidisciplinary team. Frankly, thank you for lobbing up this opportunity. What I would say is join game jams and do what you do with teams.
Yeah, and we have a lot this year.
Yeah, we're planning a bunch of game jams here, but there are game jams constantly running internationally every day, whether they are 24 hours, month long, week long. There are options, and that allows you to focus on continuing to master your current skill set, and then continuing to work with teams, because working by yourself is not what you're going to be doing in the industry.
Yeah. So you're working with teams. You're going to build something that may very well be another portfolio item. You're going to be networking with a lot of people, not just the people on your team.
Right.
And
many of which are probably professional
yes.
designers and developers working in the industry already.
And if you're a Full Sail grad, we can direct you to the Project Runway people, and maybe we can we may have something for you to do. So.
Right. Yeah, so just keep putting yourself out there, and I would say the smallest scope that you can manage, the better. And that's it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you giving us the time. And if you have any questions, obviously you can reach out to us either on LinkedIn or if you're a current student through student support. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.